Hey there, Nick Janatakis here. In this video, we're going to go over how I have my Windows 10 box set up to be a very nice Linux-based development environment on Windows. So a couple of years ago, I actually created a very similar video, and it ended up being one of the most popular videos I released on YouTube. We went over all sorts of different tools that I have installed on Windows, as well as what I have installed inside of WSL. But fast forward to today, mid-2020, Microsoft released that spring 2020 update that allows us to use WSL 2, so I figured now would be a great time to make a new version of that video, so here we are. So just a heads up, if you're using any version of Windows 10, that could be Home, Pro, Enterprise, or Student, as long as you have that spring 2020 update, all the tools that we're going to go over now, you'll be able to install as well. Also, speaking of installing tools, this is not going to be like a 15-hour video where we do like a ground zero installation and configuration of all these tools. It's basically going to be more like a high-level overview / drive-by of all the tools that I use. And if along the way you find a tool that you like, you can always go to the description and then click the link there for whatever tool you found, and you can install it on your own. Usually most of these tools, it's a matter of just downloading some like executable file or an MSI, and then you just double click it, hit OK or next a couple of times, and you're good to go. Now, when it comes to more complicated things like setting up WSL 2 or maybe configuring Docker Desktop, then I will show how I do that on video just so you can follow along easily. And when it comes to installing all the stuff onto WSL 2, inside of an Ubuntu 2004 LTS release, then I do have all that stuff documented on my dotfiles, which we'll go over as well. So you'll be able to basically copy paste commands and get set up in about 5 or 10 minutes. So with that said, let's just go at it. So one of the first tools that I have here is this launcher tool where I just hit Alt space on the keyboard and it brings up this fuzzy finder launcher where you can just start typing like whatever program that you want to launch. That could be Firefox, that could be Chrome, that could be like some IRC client that I have, but it can also be a calculator as well. So if you just want to do some math and then maybe copy the results to the clipboard, you can do that very easily. So I'm going to launch Firefox here, which by the way, I happen to use Chrome typically, but I'm using Firefox for the video just so I don't have to worry about, blurring out my history there. So this tool that we just looked at, the launcher, is called PowerToys. And it is actually created by Microsoft. So if you Googled for like PowerToys GitHub, you'll find a link here. And it goes over all sorts of different things that are included with PowerToys. Because it's not just this little run utility that allows us to launch apps, it also includes a couple of other ones here. Now, I don't want to spend too long in this section because, I could totally make another video just on PowerToys alone and spend 20 minutes talking about that. But just know that you get a couple of cool things here, like to be able to do bulk renaming and regular expression search from Windows, or even mess around with like a semi-tiled window manager called Fancy Zones. So the idea with that one is basically, and I don't want to show this one because I really don't use Fancy Zone much yet, but that could be something I use in the future. But yeah, the idea is you can like bucket off different areas of your screen, and then you can just open programs and have them get loaded into those buckets. And then you can set up different layouts, and yeah, it's quite nice. So I use i3 on my native Linux laptop. Big fan of using a tiled window manager. So now let's go over maybe a terminal because terminals are pretty important as a developer, at least for me. So the terminal I'm using right now is the Microsoft terminal, which is pretty surprising. If you've watched a whole bunch of my videos in the past, you'll know that I've been using WSL TTY, but I switched to this terminal for a number of reasons. One, WSL 2 came out, and there's this little drop-down box here with this terminal that allows you to switch between different WSL 1 or 2 distros very easily. And I really like that feature. And two, the input latency in this terminal is amazing. So I'm just holding down my key now, and there's like absolutely no delay at all when typing. It is extremely fast. It's like typing on air. And for me, if I'm typing in the terminal all the time, low input latency is very important. So if you want to install this terminal, it's pretty easy. You just do Windows key S to bring up your Windows search, and then you can just do a search for Microsoft Store. And from here, all you have to do is do a search for terminal. And there we go. You can just click the app and then install it. So this has no bearing on, needing WSL installed. So you can totally install this before anything if you want to. But now speaking of WSL, so if I run an LSB release here, you can see that I am running Ubuntu 2004 LTS. That is running inside of WSL 2. So if you actually want to run WSL 2, you can just Google for like enable WSL 2. And there's some blog post up here, which of course I'm going to link in the description. It's basically a step-by-step on how to get all set up. But the TLDR basically comes down to this. you need to Control S here and do a search for, I think Windows features should do it. Yeah, turn Windows features on or off. And then from here, down here, there is this Windows subsystem for Linux. It might be checked off for you, so go ahead and check that to make it enabled. You might need to also reboot after that. I'm not really 100% on that. So if you need to do that, I'll see you in a few. So now it's like, okay, you just rebooted, WSL is enabled. Now you need to open up a PowerShell prompt, which you can do from this terminal, right? You can just go here, click PowerShell, and then you can run some command from there. But in this case, you'll want to copy paste this command, which basically says that when you install any WSL distro, it is going to, by default, set you up to use WSL2. Cool, so now that you have WSL2 set up, the next step is to install some Linux distro of your choice. So you can go back to the Windows Store here, and then you can do a search for, if you want to do my exact setup, you would do a search for Ubuntu. And then from here, you'll just go ahead and install Ubuntu 20.04 LTS. That was released, I think, April 2020, something like that. Or yeah, pretty close to that. I don't know why it has so many poor reviews, but for me, it's been working fantastic. I think a lot of folks just weren't able to get it up and running on WSL 1. And so they gave it like a 1-star review, but we're using WSL 2, so it is totally good to go. As for installing this itself, it's like, you know, once you get it all launched up, the first time you set it up, it's going to ask you to create like a Linux username and password. That's super straightforward stuff. I think you'll be able to get going on that without any additional assistance. So here we go. We have the terminal here, right? You have WSL2 set up. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a very big fan of using Docker. I've been using Docker since about 2014. So most of my web apps are Dockerized. So I have examples for Flask, Phoenix, Node, Webpack, and more just sitting here on my dev box. Now, before we get into configuring and installing Docker Desktop, I kind of just wanted to do maybe like a 2-second TLDR or maybe like a 2-minute TLDR on like what the workflow is like for working with Docker. And by the way, I just launched Tmux here, which is a way to basically split terminals in half and do many more things. I don't want to get too deep into that right now. I have many videos on my YouTube channel about Vim and Tmux. And by the way, speaking of Vim, if you don't want to run Vim inside of WSL2 and you prefer using VS Code instead, totally fine, because the VS Code integration on Windows with WSL2 is fantastic. So over here, the Docker Compose setup, it just starts up a Flask server, Postgres, Redis, Celery, and even Webpack over here, and it's all ready to go in about 3 seconds. Now, if I go to localhost port 8000, this is the web application from the Build a SaaS App with Flask course. You know, we build a SaaS app here, and but the idea is I just want to show you what it's like to maybe like hack on the project and then see the things reload. And we're not going to really write too much code here. And by the way, that's another Windows tip. If you drag a window to the left like that and click the other one, you can now drag these two windows in unison, and it's pretty decent for doing like side-by-side things like this. So let me just go ahead and open up Vim, and I'll go to my homepage template here. And if you take a look here at the feeling lucky, what we see on the left and the right, I'm just going to make a very quick modification to that, you know, add some exclamation points, go over here and reload. Of course, I could have hit Control R to reload there, but, you know, I just wanted to show it for the sake of the video. But you can see here that, you know, it reloaded very, very fast. You know, if I bring that back to what it was before and reload, it's like, boom, basically instant. Like I'm never waiting for Docker to build something. It's very fast on Docker Desktop on Windows. Fortunately, it was actually very fast with WSL1 as well, as long as you had Windows 10 Pro, but now with WSL2, it's fast all around with all versions of Windows. And you can think like, well, you know, maybe it's not that much work to like reload a simple like Jinja template with Flask. Like, what is it like maybe working with, you know, like a style sheet file that's large, like a SAS file? So if I go down here and I just make like a modification here, you know, maybe I'll just do like a, I don't know, like in type today, like background color, I'll do like a green or something like that, and then reload that and go here and reload, then immediately it's green. And if I go back to my other terminal here and scroll up, we can see that Webpack, you know, picked up that change, that incremental change, and it just reloaded, you know, all that SAS down into CSS in 860 milliseconds. And I'm recording a video. You know, usually that's done in about half that time. So, you know, even if you have like a really big JavaScript application with tons of CSS, then, you know, everything is going to be amazing. Like even with Webpack, it's very, very fast with this WSL2 setup. Now, let me just close this out here. And this is the beauty of Docker. Like we're done working on the project and it's done. So if I had another project with like different dependencies and versions or whatever, I can just Docker Compose up that and it works. So now let's talk a little bit maybe about installing and configuring Docker Desktop to work with WSL2. So you can just go and do a search for, you know, Docker Desktop for Windows. And one of these links down here, yep, the products link, which I'll make sure to link in the description as well. And man, I am sweating over here, like 90 degrees out, so hot. But yeah, if you go to Windows Stable down here and install that, you just need to install that on your own. You know, you may need to reboot afterwards. It's not really a big deal. You can just hit OK, next, whatever, and you're off to the races. And if you do need to reboot, I'll see you in a second. Now, I'm going to also hide myself here for a second because now it's time to configure Docker Desktop. So if you go and take a look here at the Docker rail, you can just right-click that and go to Settings, and that's going to launch the Docker settings. The things that we'll want to make sure that are enabled, or make sure that this checkbox is on for use the WSL2 based engine. Also, if you're concerned about privacy, you can always turn off send the usage stats. Then in the resources tab, we have WSL integration. Yeah, just make sure that this checkbox is enabled and this is also turned on. And if you modify these, you'll need to apply and restart. So in a couple of minutes or whatever, Docker's going to restart and then you'll be good to go. You can always verify it works by running docker space info, and this will confirm that your WSL2 instance is capable of connecting to Docker Desktop. You can also run docker compose --version just to make sure that you have compose available as well. This is much nicer than the old WSL1 setup where you need to kind of, insecurely configure Docker Desktop and then install like the Docker CLI and compose, like all that stuff goes away. Like right now, Docker Desktop alone is all you need to get this fantastic integration. Good stuff. So now that we talked about Docker for a bit, let's give it a break and maybe talk about some other stuff, like things that help me in my day-to-day as like a developer working on Windows. And maybe for that, I'm just going to go to my website here. I have a uses page that has a list of all the tools that I use. Now, since this video is unscripted, I want to make sure that I don't forget anything on this list. So we talked about, using WSL2 with Ubuntu, and there's an important one here, like VcXsrv, and we'll get to that in a second, but basically that's going to allow us to share our clipboard between WSL2 and Windows, as well as maybe even run graphical apps inside of WSL2 if you want. But yeah, let's go over DexPot for now. We'll get to that in a second, because that's going to involve like fiddling around with some config files to get that up and running. So DexPot is a way to basically manage virtual workspaces. So right now, you just see one browser here. I have this terminal behind it, and this is like workspace number 1. But if I actually hit Alt-2 on my keyboard, things just went away, but they didn't quite go away. They're right here. So I hit Alt-1 to go back to that. So a DexPot is a way to basically do like virtualized desktops, like different workspaces. And the reason why I use this instead of the built-in one for Windows is like these are all assignable by hotkeys. And the really sweet thing is, like, let's say that I open up this, Internet or Explorer window here, and let's say that I want to send that over to workspace 2. So I can just hit Alt-Shift-2 and it goes away here. And if I hit Alt-2 now, there it is over here. And if I want to send it back to number 1, I do Alt-Shift-1 and then I do Alt-1 and it's back to here. So like if you're working on many different windows, different projects, maybe you just want to have like, a photo editor in like one of these workspaces and then switch to it quickly, like that's the way to go. So right now I actually have 2 monitors, so I very much like to have things open on both of them. But I can see like if I only had 1 monitor, like the workspaces would be amazing. So to get DexPot up and running, you just do a search for DexPot install or whatever, and you'll find that. Again, you just click through like next, and you have it and you're done. I didn't have to really configure anything. All of those hotkeys are just the defaults. So let's move on here into this list here. What else? So we went over the code editor a little bit. So like I use Vim, and in my .files, we'll go over the configuration for that really quick. Like, yeah, we're not going to spend a ton of time there. Terminal, yep, using the Microsoft Terminal. We went over that before. How am I doing on time? Yeah, this is going to be one hell of a video in terms of length, at least. So FCF, very cool thing for WSL2. It's basically a way to like fuzzy search your history and other great things. So that's really part of my WSL2 setup. So maybe we'll postpone that until we go over looking at the .files. But now let's talk a little bit more about some notable apps. So we went over Docker Compose. Yep, that all works with WSL2. I still do use Ditto to manage multiple clipboards. That's one that I had from a couple of years ago. And like half the comments in the YouTube video, like literally like 100 of them were like, but Windows has built-in support for multiple clipboards. I know. The really cool thing about Ditto is it actually lets you search the history of that, whereas the Windows one does not. At least not as of right now. Maybe in the future that'll change. So what's really cool about Ditto is like, let's say that I have this paragraph over here or sentence or whatever, I just hit Control-C a couple of times. that is in my clipboard right now, right? But now if I go and just maybe, select notable apps and I open up a new tab here and paste that, there's notable apps. But let's say I want to get back to the previous thing that I just copied and I want to paste that instead, like this one over here. So I can actually do Control Alt and V, and that is going to bring up this over here, which is Ditto. I understand the window's a little bit small, but it's basically a history of all the things that I copied to my clipboard. So you can see like the 860 milliseconds that actually got copied to my clipboard just from selecting it. And the really great thing is, if I want to search for 860, like I can just go right to that. Like that's the main feature of why I use Ditto instead of just using the built-in one from Microsoft. So installing this is also pretty easy, like Ditto Clipboard Manager or something like that. Like that'll get you going. Yep, here it is from SourceForge. And yeah, you can just download that 64-bit one and you are good to go. That's something you want to also make sure that you have start up on Windows. So in the settings there, just make sure that you enable it to start when Windows boots up. Very, very handy. So what else do we have here? Yeah, so previously I was using that key Perina, like I still can't pronounce it 2 years later, but then, I switched to Microsoft PowerToys to use the app launcher. AutoHotkey is amazing for doing all sorts of great things. Like for example, I'm going to hit Windows key T right now, and that's going to launch a brand new terminal. Or I can hit Windows key W, it's going to launch Chrome, which is my typical web browser. Or I can do like Windows key I to open up GIMP, which is what I use to do photo editing, like if I want to make a YouTube thumbnail or something like that. The reason why I don't use Photoshop is because one of these days I'm actually going to switch to native Linux and GIMP runs there, but Photoshop does not. And I don't want to worry about, running it inside of like a Windows VM or something like that. Now, AutoHotkey is important there because AutoHotkey is powering how all of these hotkeys work. So if I go to github.com/nickjj.files, there is one thing that I do need to show now. If I go to, where is this at? Yes, blah, 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 app data, roaming, I think, startup. Yeah. And don't worry, like I'm just skimming over this because it's not too important. What I wanted to show you was the AutoHotkey script to make this work. So this is really sweet. You can like assign different hotkeys that you want to do. Like when I hit Windows key I, that just launches GIMP. Or, these are other programs that I have installed as well. These are all on my .files, and we'll get to this in due time. But you can also do very interesting things with AutoHotkey, like remapping your keys. So since I work at Vim all the time, hitting escape is something you do all the time in Vim. And reaching all the way to the escape key is crazy. And I never really use cap locks, so I just use AutoHotkey to swap the two. So now when I hit cap locks, it's actually hitting escape. And this works system-wide. It's not just inside of Vim. So that's something that's, saves me from reaching all the way there. And AutoHotkey is one of these tools where I can do like a 2-hour video on it, but just know that it's like one of the best tools ever for Windows when it comes to like automating stuff. So if you do AutoHotkey, like Windows or something like that, wow, learn to spell, Nick, learn to spell. It's AutoHotkey.com apparently. Yeah, you can just download it here, get that all set up, and you're good to go. Also, when it comes to AutoHotkey, you'll probably want that AutoHotkey script to come up every time you boot your computer. So if I had myself here again, and I go to the sys tray, you can see that I do have that AutoHotkey script sitting here. And like there's the one for Ditto as well, but I'm pretty sure that one just has an option in the app to do that. But one way to get something like this AutoHotkey script to come up when Windows starts is to place it in a very specific folder location. So in your case, you would replace Nick here with your username, but this is a long path that you need to actually place this script in. In fact, if you do a Windows key S, and then you do a search for run, you can run shell startup, and that's going to basically open up this folder location that we're looking at here on GitHub. And here we can see that AutoHotkey script, which is the same one that's in GitHub right behind me. You'll notice here too that I have a couple of other things. We'll go over these in due time. Like this one is related to the VcXsrv. And Sizer is also another tool from this list here. I think if I go down here, where is that? Yeah, it was right after AutoHotkey. So Sizer is a pretty useful tool, at least for me as someone who records videos. I don't know if it's going to be super useful for you, but the basic idea is typically when I'm recording videos, I'm actually not really ever recording my entire screen unless I'm doing a video like this where I want to like showcase Windows. Instead, like my desktop is 2560 by 1440, and I basically just want to record 1080p videos. So really what I would like to do, and this is how I have it set up with like OBS, is I tell OBS like, look, go ahead and record like this specific area of my screen, like pixel perfect. But for me to remember like exactly where to position this window and size it would be insane. And like if I wanted to do it for a different window, it would be a super tedious process. So with Sizer, I just hit Control Window key Z, pick this 1080p option, and this actually moved to the exact point where it needs to be. So just to be a little more explicit here, let's say this window were like sitting over here, I just do this and that, and boom, it's already magically, or not magically, but it's set up exactly how I want. Like if my terminal window, like I'm ready to record a YouTube video, I just do that, and it's like, it is ready to go. And this tool is pretty nice too, because, even if you don't want to just move it to a position, if you start just like resizing the window, a bad example here, this is one weird visual like issue with the Microsoft terminal. The text gets really crazy when you move it. But if you look at the bottom right there, you can see that the position and the size of the window gets updated based on that little tooltip from Sizer. And hopefully they fix this issue because it looks a little bit silly trying to resize that window. Fortunately, I don't really do that very much on video. So, that's really the only weird visual thing I've seen happen with the terminal that I don't like, but it's not like a deal breaker at all. So going back to this list here, let's take a look at some other programs that I have. I mentioned I use Chrome and Firefox. I use Google Hangouts and Zoom to basically do like client calls because I do a lot of freelance work. Momentum is a really cool Chrome extension, and there is one for Firefox as well. Windows key W, you can see this background image is pretty nice. Like every couple hours you get a different one. It shows you the time, like good evening, and then you can put like a to-do items here if you want. I'm not going to sleep just yet because it's only 6:20 p.m., but you get the idea. I kind of like that. It's like a morale booster, and it's free and it's nice, so why not? Then for things like IRC, I like to use HexChat, which is, if you're wondering what this orange icon was, that is this one over here. Not going to go too deep into this one, but if you want to talk to other developers about topics you're interested in, like Docker and Elixir and Flask and other stuff, there's hundreds of people on here. It's like an alternative to using Slack maybe. In my opinion, I like it a lot better because, yeah, it's IRC. Been using it for a long time. Then, as a developer, also, I guess I'll go over this one first. I also use a command line utility called pass to basically manage all of my passwords. We'll go into this one in a little bit more detail when we take a look at my .files. But what I was saying before was, as a developer, besides developing, you're probably doing things like listening to music, right? I do this all the time. And I use Foobar 2000. So if I do Windows key M there, it's going to open up Foobar here. It's a very, very super lightweight MP3 player. It has like shuffle and playlists, and you can play things and, adjust the volume and skip around. It's super lightweight, barely uses any CPU and memory. I've been using this forever, since like the early 2000s. It's like my favorite MP3 player. You can see here, yeah, it uses like 5 megs of RAM. Great. Then for resizing images, I'll close this too. There's a program called IrfanView that I find to be quite nice. It's super lightweight. There's not a lot of like boilerplate around the image tool itself, so you can basically preview your images like as large as they need to be, and it's very good for doing very quick like bulk actions like resizing a whole bunch of stuff or just resizing one image. And Foobar 2000 also, the link is right here, so if you want to download it, it's right there. So let me start closing out some of these tabs so I don't get lost. And yeah, I mentioned I'm using GIMP, mainly because, if I eventually go native Linux, it runs quite well over there. And then for like financing and accounting, I use GnuCash. So, I'm a freelance developer, sole proprietor. I do courses on the side. Like, it's very important for me to keep track of all my finances. So GnuCash is an open source, cross-platform, like, finance tracking and accounting system. I like it a little bit better than Excel because, yeah, it's quite nice. I can't really show that one on video because it contains like, all sorts of like internal financial data that I don't want to share. But yeah, it's free. You can download it, check it out. It's pretty nice. The rest of this file really is like my hardware for all my other stuff. I don't really want to go too deep into this one because you're probably not into like recording videos that much, but mainly I use OBS to record my videos, then Camtasia to edit them. Lately, I've been using DaVinci Resolve to try to do some video editing, but I'm getting some issues when it comes to MP4 exports, like the audio is a little bit messed up. So haven't been able to really switch to that, although I do use DaVinci Resolve to edit all my podcasts. In case you didn't know, runninginproduction.com is a podcast that I started like 6 months ago. Not going to go super deep into this one. But yeah, basically I talk to people about how they run their web apps in production, and I have a different guest on every time. So I believe that is it when it comes to all the tools that I use on Windows. So now let's go over to the Linux side of things where I have a whole bunch of stuff installed into WSL 2. So if you scroll down here in the dot files, you'll see that there is quite a bit of documentation, like quickly get set up with these dot files. And I highly, highly recommend that you do read all of this and very carefully go over it, because in addition to being able to just like copy paste these commands into WSL2, there are a couple of config files that you'll need to put on the Windows side of things. For example, if I scroll up to the top here and we go into the C folder, there is the WSL config, and this config file is very, very important. At the time of making this video, there is a bug with WSL2 where it kind of just could potentially use 80% of your system's memory, and it's not going to release that memory unless you run some special commands. But to basically get around that, what you can do is you can just tell WSL2 to be capped at a specific amount of memory. In my case, I'm using 6 gigs because I have 16 gigs on my system. But if you have something like 8 gigs of RAM, you might want to set this to 4 gigs or even 3. Then optionally also, I just have the swap file that WSL2's VM creates to be on my regular hard drive instead of my SSD, because I just don't want it to write to my SSD. Yeah, this is a very important config file. So, definitely read over these docs. But with that said, basically what you could do if you want to replicate this setup is, copy paste this, copy paste this, copy paste this. And then it's like, as you move down the list here, you can start maybe installing certain things that you do want or you don't want. Like for example, and I'll go over a couple more of these in a minute. Like I'm using the ASDF version manager because I do install Node and Ruby directly into WSL2. That's mainly for my, this podcast site here is a static website using Jekyll, and that requires having Ruby and Node installed, and I just don't have those Dockerized yet. So this is a really nice way to manage your dependencies. Like for example, you can install Ruby 2.71, and look at that. I already see that I have a typo there. That should be Node.js, not JD. But the basic idea is, you can copy paste this command and install it after installing ASDF, and you would have Node installed in like 2 minutes. So very, very handy. But again, there's things down here that you might not want. Like I use Ansible, which is a configuration management tool to basically, configure servers that you set up. Maybe you're not into that. Likewise, I have like the AWS CLI and Terraform, and Terraform's a way to basically, do what Ansible does, but for your actual infrastructure, like setting up the actual server, load balancers and managed databases and all sorts of great stuff like that. I don't want to get too deep into what's in that because that's like way out of scope for this video. But these are some of the tools that I have. And FCF is another tool as well. So if I hop back over to my terminal here, we're inside of this Flask application. FCF is super handy because it lets me do things like this, where, let's say that I want to just open up my app.py file. I can just start typing app.py, and, I don't even need to type in the full file name, and it's just going to let me just quickly navigate to it. And you can do some other really, really cool things too here. Like if I do a search for Snake Eyes, it is going to search the entire project for that term. And it kind of just shows like a little preview on the right here of that file. Like if I just wanted to jump straight to here, then I can do that. And there it is. I have some videos about that on my channel as well, so I'm not going to get too deep into that. But it's more than just a Vim plugin. For example, on the command line, if you do Control-R, you can reverse search your history, and FCF takes over this, so you can just type in something like, like DK, Docker Compose Up or whatever, just like that, like a fuzzy finder, and then I can just run that command. This is very, very handy. I use this all the time. So going back to the dot files over here, I guess we can maybe go over some of these packages here. For example, I am installing Vim GDK because that gives us plus Clipboard support with Vim. Now, even if you're not using Vim, you still want to have Clipboard support to where you can share things between WSL2 and your main Windows system without having to do anything special like, run clip.exe to like pass things to and from that clipboard, because that is one way to do it without going over the method we're going to do now. But instead, what I like to do is I like to install this one tool, VcXsrv. And the basic idea here is, and by the way, it's a free download. I've been running it for years. It is very good. And it's an X server that you can run on Windows. And technically, this will even allow you to run things like graphical apps inside of WSL2. But for right now, we're just going to be using it to get that clipboard access. And it's very important, by the way, if you go up to my dot files inside of one of these folders here, in that startup folder, there is this config.xlaunch file. And if you take this file here, go to the raw like this, copy it, and then save it over to this directory on your computer, which will, replace the nick with your name, then this is going to configure VcXsrv to work for basically clipboard sharing, and it does basically everything you need to do. You don't need to worry about configuring it yourself. So I highly recommend to do that if you want to get clipboard sharing to work. I don't want to go too deep into my .files itself, like Vim configuration, but there is some Vim stuff that you want to configure if you want to actually have Vim write to that clipboard. But I have other videos about that if you want to take a look. Likewise, there's Teambox and some other stuff here as well. Like for example, when it comes to htop, if you're new to the Linux world, htop is a utility that lets you basically see the health of your system, right? We can see CPU cores, memory, what processes are being run. Like you can, sort them and kill them and do whatever you want. This tool is very similar to where if you were to run something like Control-Shift-Escape on Windows, you get this task manager where you can kind of see like basic system stats about that, like there's a process list and so on. So you can do that from within the command line on any server using htop. So now let's go over the command line tool called pass. This is a very nice tool that you can manage your passwords from the command line, and you're in full control over how you have things set up. For example, I just copied my nickjj GitHub password to my clipboard, and that's going to expire in 45 seconds. If I didn't do this -c here at the end, it would have just echoed it to the screen. Now, what's really cool about this tool is it's not limited to just passwords. So if you have a couple of API keys that's like multi-lines long, you can save all of that to disk. And everything gets encrypted and saved locally, nothing is pushed to the cloud, although you can always back up the file to Dropbox or something like that if you wanted to sync it to multiple devices. Now, it would be a little bit too long here to go into detail about this tool and how to install it, but if you do a Google search for pass nickjanatakis and you go to this one blog post, which I'll link in the description, then if you follow this end to end, then you'll be good to go. Basically, this gives you like a little high-level overview demo of how it works and, where you can go to set up a GPG key pair and things like that. So now let's go back to the .files readme here, and we'll just wrap things up by going over maybe like how these .files work at a very high level, right? So the basic idea is you would git clone this directory to somewhere within WSL2, maybe like the home directory in .files, and then you create all these different symlinks, and these are linking basically the file that exists in this .files directory that you just cloned to like your home directory for the bashrc file and for the profile and for the, vimrc and tmux-config and, whatever else becomes of this repo in the future, because maybe, I'll add new stuff as time goes on. But there is one really important thing here in the bashrc file that I almost forgot to go over. So let me just go ahead and open this up in Vim and we'll take a quick peek. So down here, we do have a couple of conditions. For example, if you're running WSL2, then this is going to execute. And if you're running WSL1, then this is going to execute instead. And these export display lines are very important to get that VcXsrv to work. So without these lines here, then you wouldn't be able to, share your clipboard or even see graphical apps that you run through WSL2. Now, I'm bringing that up because I know not everyone is going to completely replicate my .files. So in case you're running something like ZSH or Fish or a different shell, you'll want to make sure to poke around my bashrc file to move these commands over to whatever config files those shells use. And I think that's about it. So if we go back to the README file here, again, if you want to really step through this stuff on your own, it's all here for you to go over. For example, like if you don't want these utilities, then you can just like copy paste this command into VS Code or Notepad or whatever, remove the commands from here, and you are good to go. I hope that really helps you set up Windows to be a very productive development environment, especially using WSL2. I am very, very happy with the setup. I know that I mentioned that, one day I would like to go native Linux, but it's really not because the Windows setup is horrible. Like, I'm actually very productive with the setup, very happy with it. The reason why I would like to go native Linux is mainly for privacy. Like, I kind of just don't like the idea that Microsoft feeds off my telemetry data, even using the basic telemetry. So that's the main reason why I would want to go native Linux. But other than that, yeah, this is a pretty cool setup. I'm very happy to use it. If you have any questions about anything, please let me know in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer every single question. Also, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up because it really helps. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.